Hi, I'm Cora Louise. I'm a freelance artist, and last week I ended up in the deepest creative funk that I've had in a very long time. I despised my work, I was throwing drawings in the bin, I just felt like a downright fraud, to be honest, which I think a lot of people do, imposter syndrome. But I just felt really low about it all, and in that moment was like, there's no possible future for the craft that I've spent years practicing. But within a week I was feeling more invigorated by my creativity than I have done in quite a while. So I thought I'd do a video talking about the steps that I took to get to that place and what I'm going to implement going forward to stop such drastic crashes in the future. I mean, we all have brief, minuscule declines in belief. I think that's very natural. That happens several times within one piece of work for me, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to that as well. But instead, I want to go forward, stopping those prolonged, deeper, more emotional creative funks that last for way too long and, to be honest, have happened way too often in the last few years for me. But this time, and within the last week, I think I've been able to pinpoint a few ways that I can stop this going on in the future. A few practices which I think I've overlooked, which would keep my creativity healthy and stop it from running out of steam like it did last week. And if I'm being honest with myself, it has been dwindling in quite a long time. It just finally gave up the ghost quite recently. I think all artists are emotionally connected to their work, put a lot of themselves and their belief into their work. So if it doesn't feel like it's representing what they wanted it to correctly or representing the ability that they want to have, it's an emotional process. So we need to put things in place to stop that getting too much too often. So I have 3 tips for you, or 3 practices that I'm going to try implementing in my everyday going forward. So I've called them Q just because it nicely worked out that way. So Q is Cultivate, Unwind and Experiment. I'll go in more depth in those separately. I'll mark them below so you can jump around if you want to. But before we begin, I want to talk a little about the 2 main factors that I do think contribute to a low creative mood. And obviously this is outside of other obstacles that life throws at us, like our mental health or anything else that goes on. This video is about frustrations and limitations that are coming from within our creativity that can be aided, not things outside of our creativity that are just affecting us. So like I said, I think there are 2 main factors within creativity that could be contributing to art block or an art funk, as I like to call it. And so one is a frustration in ability. So perhaps that's a gap that you found within your ability recently, which is meaning that you can't achieve the style or the look that you are wanting to achieve because you haven't really learned that yet. Or perhaps it's a general feeling that you're not moving forward, that you've not learned anything for a while, and so you don't feel like you're improving. Even if you are just drawing most days and creating most days, you'll learn something from that process. But if you're not actively learning something and feeling that you're learning something, then I think that can make you feel like you're not moving forward. Which leads us to number 2, which I think is a monotonous practice. I think the leading problem for my art funks or creative funks is that I get bored of repeating the same practice over and over again. No experimentation or variety in your process can lead to your art feeling more procedural than creative. So even if what you're doing may look good because you've learned a certain way to do it and you're following that process or that procedure over and over again, it perhaps doesn't feel very good. I know I've gotten to that point where it gets too much of a well-known set of rules that you just keep going over and over again, which isn't completely the point of art or creativity. I think it's an element to creating, but it shouldn't be the whole thing to a lot of people. I think that's why people are drawn to it in the first place, is to have fun and to feel some kind of emotion towards it. So being too procedural can completely ruin that. So I think that monotonous process can be a big factor into why you're not feeling very creative anymore. So I think those are the 2 big categories and 2 things that have affected me, and I have some practices, exercises, tips that have helped me within the last week or so to get out of my art funk, and they kind of fall within those two categories. So anyway, here are my 3 tips that have worked for me and perhaps may work for you. So number 1 is cultivation. So the dictionary definition of cultivation is to develop a new skill or to prepare land for crops, and both of these definitions I think will serve us well within this practice. So what I mean by cultivation in this context of creativity is practicing fundamentals or expanding knowledge, so to make the creative process easier or to give you the tools to make sure you can achieve the style or just the desired effects that you want to achieve. So very much like when you're preparing the soil to sow the seed, I think that practicing and studying is preparation for when you sit down and create. Especially when it's something ambitious, I think that preparation is more important. It means you've already done the work beforehand to make the growing or creative process easier. I think maintaining a continuous flow of education is important. 1, to better your work because there's always something new to learn, and 2, to keep it interesting, but we'll get back to that later. I've definitely overlooked my education within my creativity lately. So I studied photography at university, so my illustration is all self-taught. I spent a long time taking online tutorials and classes for the first couple of years after I left university, except I was learning to become a character designer because that's what I wanted to do at the time. So I was learning how to use design and story and shape rather than composition and light. Although I should have been learning all those things, but because I was teaching myself and I was just out of university, I learned the things that interested me most, and it got me to a place where I was really happy, and I am really happy that I learned all that because I think it has made my work unique in its style and more characterful in a way that it perhaps wouldn't have if I hadn't spent that time studying character design. But since then I've realised that I prefer to make more detailed full image illustrations rather than designing and concept art. I still enjoy character design and I still freelance commission character design, and I teach it within 3D Totals books sometimes, which if you've never seen them before, I really recommend them. They're a brilliant source of education if you're interested in character design or concept art or illustration in general. So I'll link them below if you want to take a look. But the problem was I went from feeling that I had a pretty good understanding of the technical abilities that I needed to get my work to the place that it needed to be to achieve the certain style that I wanted, to achieve a certain quality within character design. But I went from that to feeling less confident about how to get the look or the style or the quality that I want to with my work now. But I've learned a lot since I restarted a couple of years ago, mainly having to teach myself how to paint traditionally. I went from a fully digital artist to now being a watercolour artist mainly, and I do like a digital twist on my work at the end just to enhance the colours. So that's taken up a lot of my education, which has been worthwhile education because I needed to learn how to use these new tools, but I wasn't feeling the confidence with my abilities that I had grown from character design. So even though I have learnt along the way whilst I've been creating these PCs, I can create with more confidence than I did at the beginning, obviously because I've been doing it for a little while now, but I didn't feel like I completely understood how I was achieving some things that I was achieving. I couldn't sit down and explain to you why some of the things were working that I was doing or how to make other things work that I want to work. So I was on Sean Tan's website, an artist that I absolutely adore, and I was on his FAQ section, and I really like something that he was talking about on there, which is the importance of being able to articulate your art. Not just your art, but the process that you took, the tools that that you use, the story behind it, the meaning behind it, all those things. Not only does being able to articulate those things properly because you've learned those things make for a more confident piece of work, but I think also a more confident creator. So I think that's been my issue, and I think that would give me more confidence is learning. So more cultivation, going back and developing more skills and places that I have gaps, and just refining those abilities and making sure that I understand them so that I can articulate them, whether that's through my imagery visually, or if it's when I'm explaining my work and when I'm talking to clients, etc. And of course this can be applied to any creative endeavour: art, graphic design, music, poetry, writing, photography, whatever it is that interests you. And I do have a recommendation, but I'm afraid it's only for visual artists who are studying painting or illustration of any type like that, or design. So I devoured this whole book in 2 days, living off lamplight, cups of tea, and the sheer will to not feel so disenchanted with my work anymore. And this book is Colour and Light by James Gurney, which is the Bible for all artists everywhere. Now it says it's a guide for the realistic painter, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's just for people who want to paint realistically or just for oil painters, because that is what he mainly does. I'm more of a stylistic illustrator. I like things to be shapely and characterful rather than really realistic. That's just the style that I enjoy doing, but I want to have elements of realism within it, if you know what I mean. I think it's good to understand those basics so that I can mix them with my stylistic choices. So I'm making the choices because I have an understanding of the basics and because I want to be artistic with it, rather than because I'm ignorant to what the real light or real colour should look like, especially within full scenes with people, all that going on. Trying to manage all that is still new to me, even though I've been doing it for a little while now. So learning these things will help me be able to manage all that in one scene. So studying this book in the 2 days that I did study it has left me with a new outlook on art and the world in general. I'm walking around studying light and shade and noticing things that I've never noticed before, understanding why shadows are the colours that they are, looking over landscapes and knowing why everything seems bluer the further it gets away. So I've gone from a couple of weeks ago having never noticed some of these things, not having any understanding, to be able to explain some of this stuff to the people around me and to myself, and then imitate it within my work. So even though this is just the beginning, I think it's been a fundamental change already, and this book is set out in a way that you can dip in and out of it if you need to look something up. It's full of science, which I love a little bit of science. I always find that very interesting, about colour and light, and I just think for anyone, not just people who are painting in oil and painting realistically, but I think for any artist, this will be really helpful just to have on your side. You don't need to necessarily devour it like I did within a couple of sittings. I think it's good to dip in and out of, and will help you fix some struggles that you may be having in your work very quickly by just turning to the page that you need to turn to. So in conclusion, for cultivation, I think it's important to keep studying, but to also not worry about having gaps in your knowledge. It would be boring if we knew everything within 5 years of creating art. There's always something to learn, which I think makes things sound more fun and interesting. There's always things to develop. So if a lack of knowledge is what is getting you in your art funk, then I think you should just see it as a sign to just go and learn something new, make that fun, something that interests you, something that will improve your work in the way that you want to improve it to achieve what you want to achieve. It doesn't necessarily need to be how shadows work or how light works. Go and find something that interests you within art, something that you can bring back to your creativity, to your process, and use, something that makes you feel like you're moving forward and improving and developing, anything that will help you feel more confident in achieving what you want to in your art. So number 2 in Q is unwinding. Now this seems like a very basic idea, but I've been absolutely terrible at this lately, and I think that anybody who is a creative who has turned their creative interest into a job will lose this at some point within their art. So what I mean by unwinding is being creative in some way out of the workspace. So creating something which has no or very little importance. It's not intended to be anything more than it is in the moment that you created, so there's no intention to even possibly share it. It's just for your eyes only. I think between work pressure and social media pressure, a lot of artists have to balance the two now. Most of, if not all, of an artist's creative process is intermingled with pressure and stress and intention with their art. Perhaps being worried about how it will be perceived, especially on social media when you've got a mass of people who will see your work, and you need to keep that flow up constantly, and they can say whatever they want to and comment wherever they want to on your work as well. That can feel a little stressful. Now, worrying about what people think about your work, especially your audience or a client that you have, it's just a natural part of the job. We can't help that. But I think the problem comes when you're only creating for that, only creating for that purpose. I was only creating when I was doing it for work, or I was creating a big piece that I was spending a long time on that was meant to be shared in my portfolio or on social media. I was not creating anything outside of that, not for fun or not for me, so that's all that art became to me. In university and a couple of years after, when I was starting to teach myself art, I used to carry around a sketchbook all the time. I particularly loved sitting in coffee shops, which I think a lot of artists can relate to, and drawing the other customers in the coffee shop, just quick studies. So I would either do that, or I would draw whilst watching something like a TV programme. Or one of the first films that inspired me to want to do character design at the beginning, before I changed my mind, was the film Paranorman. I love that film, and I used to sit and with a sketchbook and watch that film and sketch the characters as I was watching it. So there was no reason for that, and I mean, it was before I started freelancing, so I wasn't feeling the pressure to have to create something that was going to bring something back to me, bring money back to me, or bring opportunities back. So it was before all that, so I suppose I didn't yet have that pressure. I was at university still. I wasn't even sure if I was going to be doing illustration or whatever. It was just something that I used to do, and I've lost that in the recent years. I just didn't have the urge to create outside of work any longer, which is really sad. I lost the enjoyment of art, so I lost doing those things outside of work, which means I think I also lost extra practice and associating it with relaxing and focus and leaving room to experiment, especially room to experiment. Only creating when you're worried about how your time is being used and not wasting any time, or how the outcome has to be a predictable quality and a predictable style, means you never have the time or the chance to risk experimentation. And therefore I think you start losing things like playfulness and education, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. But last week, getting myself out of the art funk, I started to carry a sketchbook around with me again. I kind of forced myself to, not just forced, I think I'd started by reading the James Gurney book. I'd learned a lot in that, and I think the education was inspiring me just alone. So I pulled out the sketchbook, and I have a lot of sketchbooks that are very empty, that haven't been used for a very long time, and this kind of spiral bound book of empty pages can be a little daunting, especially when you've got no purpose or any intention of what you're going to do. There's no end result that you're trying to work towards. You're just trying to do anything. And I did turn to something that I find easier, a little more comfortable to do, which is faces, because that's what I've always been drawn to most. So I sat down and drew a face just in pencil, which was the first time I've done that in a very long time, because I usually draft anything on my iPad. So I pulled out Pinterest, sketched a portrait off of Pinterest in a style that I quite liked, and ended up enjoying that process more than I've enjoyed anything for a little while. It was relaxing, and I went into it not worrying about the outcome, because I was just doodling, just trying out some new pencil techniques, etc. And this video wasn't even a consideration then, so I wasn't even planning on sharing any of these doodles that I did, or these sketches. It was just for myself and just to practice. So I've since carried it around in my bag. I have taken it in coffee shops again. You can take someone with you to a coffee shop to do that, because I can still talk whilst I'm doing that. It's not like when I take a book to a coffee shop and read. You can't communicate whilst you're doing that, although I don't mind doing that either. We're going out with people and just reading together is quite a nice pastime. But I think going out and taking a sketchbook doesn't stop you from being able to socialise at the same time. You can sit and talk with them whilst you're doodling. So that sounds even more relaxing and means you can associate your art and your creativity with a very relaxing activity, which is nice when it's associated with work a lot of the time. I also know I'm getting an extra practice, even if it doesn't feel like I'm not the same as studying this, which really felt like work homework that I set myself. Even though I did enjoy learning, I had to put a lot of brain power into it. I think this kind of unwinding activity where you're being creative in a no pressure way, but just feel like you're actively practicing at the same time, makes me feel like I'm still doing something towards my creativity, that I'm still moving forward, that I'm still being active, and that I am therefore more confident with my work. So unwinding could mean anything for anyone. It could mean like a sketch pad and pencil like I've been doing. It could be writing a silly poem in the notes app on your phone. It could be collaging from magazines and books that you have around the house. It could be doodling in Procreate or photographing on your camera phone. Anything that is relaxing to you outside of work. So in conclusion, my second tip, number 2, unwind, is to make sure that you take time to carry your creativity with you outside of the workplace. To use your creativity to unwind alongside your more serious, more purposeful pieces. Otherwise, you could lose all positive feelings that you have towards creativity. So make sure that you don't lose that, or if you feel like you have, you can slowly gain it back by just carrying a sketchbook around with you, or like I say, if it's a different creative endeavour, writing things on your phone or photographing on your camera phone, etc. So the third and final tip of Q is experimentation. As I mentioned in number 2, unwind, experimentation is crucial. I think so anyway. I think experimentation is an amalgamation of the things that we've already discussed, so education and playfulness. It's a perfect dichotomy that when put together I think sums up the basics of creativity very well. So the last time that I really experimented with my creativity was when we were in lockdown in 2020. I think having that time to experiment kind of kick-started off the idea that I didn't really want to do digital art anymore, that I wanted to try something traditional. It wasn't satisfying me anymore, and I wanted to try and find a traditional way of painting or creating that I would felt more like me. In this time I tried various art forms, oil paints, I've got acrylic paints, I bought charcoal and coloured pencil and watercolour, and a combination of watercolour and coloured pencil is what I ended up enjoying the most. I enjoyed the style that I created with it, and it's what I continue to use to this day. But I do have a bit of a negative feeling around experimentation. I only really experiment when I have an urgent need to change my art and how I feel about it. So I don't necessarily have positive feelings towards it, because in those moments I'm just desperate to fix my work. I want it to be done quickly so I can get out of the funk and carry on. I wanted it to be done quickly at the beginning of my career, when I wanted to make sure I found a style so I could start working, and then just throughout as I've continued my career, whenever I start having these feelings and want to change things up and experiment, it feels like it needs to be done quickly so that you can continue with your journey, with your style, with your career, without it taking too much time away from your work. But I think if I had allowed myself to continue experimentation within my work constantly, the path would have been much steadier rather than having these huge dips every few miles of steady road. So I think shaking up the everyday process gives you that steady flow of variety in your art, therefore making it a more enjoyable and exciting process, as well as educating you along the way, whether that's with new techniques, with new styles or tools or processes, etc. That education could be anything, but it just makes you feel like you're still moving forward. So what I've done recently with experimentation is that I've noticed that I still feel very nervous around creating anything to do with backgrounds. Like I said, I started to do character design, so I was drawing a lot of people, and that's where I feel most comfortable, and it's what I do enjoy the most. I love drawing faces. So my experiment personally this time, although I do want to experiment with other things later, was to paint just a background and use some of the techniques that I learned from the James Gurney book whilst I do so. So although experimentation can also be trying different styles and different paints, etc., which I do want to try some more mixed media stuff as I go forward. But for now, my experimentation was to see how it would go with me just creating a background without the crutch of having any people within it. So for some reason I decided to give myself a bit of a difficult task. I do kind of, when I want to do something, I don't start at the very basics, because my mum said to me recently when I was thinking that I might attempt crocheting, she was saying just do squares, just start off with crocheting squares, whereas I wanted to do a top or a toy straight away. I mean, I haven't started crocheting, it was just a fleeting thought, but if I was going to start, I was going to get a pattern that was for a toy or for some kind of thing that I could wear, rather than just crocheting a little square to start off with. I always want to jump in the deep end for some reason, which I don't really think is a bad thing. The only thing is that it can be disappointing when you've jumped right into the deep end and that it doesn't really go how you wanted it to, which is expected. But I think if you go in kind of knowing that, you can learn quite a lot doing things difficult straight away. But I think different processes work for different people. But anyway, for some reason I did decide to do something a little more difficult again. I'd taken a picture in the kitchen when the light was shining through very nicely and reflecting on the stove and on the wall and on the drawers, etc. So I'd taken that picture and I decided to paint that picture. The beginning was me thinking I have no idea what I'm doing and I don't know how to create this reflection or to create this technique that I'm seeing within this photo. I don't know how to imitate that within my art, but I kept at it and I managed to work out a way that I could do that most times. I was pretty happy with the outcome in the end, especially considering I was tackling techniques that I'd never really tried before, and it made me feel proud that I'd done something that I wasn't that comfortable in doing, that I'd kind of stayed away from because of that. I didn't feel confident in it. So I do think experimentation is good for that, because it makes you realise sometimes that you can do things that you think you possibly couldn't do. But there are also the times when experimenting leads to nothing. But I think that if you are doing the process that you're used to, that you do every single day, and the outcome isn't as so great or what you expected it to be, that can feel more damaging or disheartening or frustrating, because you think I should be able to do this. This is the process that I do. These are the abilities that I've practiced. I think that's more disheartening than when you not fail, but when a piece doesn't come out how you wanted it to when you're experimenting. Because going into a piece with the purpose of experimentation takes away the expectation of an outcome. So the point of the process is to have fun and to learn something, and therefore the outcome isn't the important part necessarily. So going forward, I want to continue experimenting by adding perhaps different tools within my process, to continue painting backgrounds and perhaps some things from nature, some outside backgrounds, just continue pushing myself in that way. But in conclusion, I think that experimentation, a continuous flow experimentation, can keep you from going in an art funk. It takes away expectation and pressure and can open new doors to possibilities, ones that you've probably never even considered. It can create a style as well. If you accidentally fall upon something because you just tried something out and you really like how it turns out, you may not have done that through your normal process. You needed to experiment to find that. And keeping this as a continuous trend within your art process and just through your everyday creations, I think will keep your creativity running strong. So all of that helped me go from a pretty low mood, a pretty low place, to feeling enthusiastic and inspired. It's only a couple of weeks later since I started doing this, so I want to continue implementing those practices into my everyday, see how it goes, and maybe I can update you in the future with that. But I hope if you are feeling any of these things, that you are in an art funk or just a low mood creatively, that some of these things may have helped you. I think that cultivation, unwinding and experimentation will help keep your interests and inspiration steady. So are there any tips or tricks that you have to keep you out of an art funk that you could share? I'd love to hear what you use, because different things will help for different people, so I'd love to hear what you use to get yourself out of that mood. So thank you so much for watching this video. I know it's a bit of a long one, but I do really enjoy doing these discussion videos. I've not done many yet, but let me know what you think. Sometimes I prefer doing these to the process videos because I feel like I don't have much to say because I'm too busy creating. So I prefer, I think, to discuss things and then show art alongside that. But let me know what you think. If you're interested in seeing more of my stuff, you can follow me on Instagram at CoraLouiseArtist, or you can see my portfolio on my website, which is coralouise.com, or you can buy something from me if you so wish to from my Etsy store, which is Cora Louise Store. Obviously, if you go to my website, all the links will be there as well. So thanks again for watching. I really hope you perhaps got something from this, and I'd love to see what you think below, and subscribe if you'd like to see more from me, and I will see you next week. Bye!